So, Bill, what's that tell you? It tells you the worldview that's been foisted upon the last 4 to 5 generations and slaughtering 80 million babies and sending our great grandkids into debt and completely depleting the Social Security fund is probably going to leave the next generation with nothing on their hands but death. And I honestly, I can't think of any other possibility than the euthanizing of 20, 30, 40 million elderly by the year 2045, except if the church steps in and preaches the truth and calls people to repentance on these issues.
And that's the hope we have. The hope we have is that the church will wake up, that Christians will begin to be serious about their faith, and that they will proclaim truth and grace and the hope of Jesus Christ.
And welcome, my friends, to Generations. Kevin Swanson, your host, also Bill Jack, one more time in studio with us.
Hey, Kevin.
Now, you're heading out, Bill, so we're going to say bye-bye to you after this program. You're heading out to the Worldview Academy camps.
2 months.
Out on the West Coast.
All over the place. Start in Ohio, end up on the West Coast.
Okay.
Yep. Week-long camps that train students in worldviews, evangelism, and apologetics, and servant leadership skills.
So our families can send their kids off to these worldview camps this summer in different places all over the United States.
Yes.
I mean, name some states.
Well, as I said, Ohio, we have Texas, we have Florida, we have South Carolina, we have Arizona, California, Oregon, Washington,
all over the
Minnesota.
place. All over the place. It's a week-long deal, right?
Hampshire.
I think it's week-long.
It is the best week of a student's life. It's intense, 26, 29 hours in class, but it's not merely pop their heads open and pour information in. We train them, we take them out and have them engage the culture and conversation.
Good. And you've been doing it for a long time.
This is almost our 30th year.
And I think, we're planting seeds, and we're hoping that the seeds will yield some good results and hopefully bring about some effective biblical worldview-based leaders. And they know God, they know His Word, and they're willing to be good stewards to the commission that they've been given by Jesus.
Yep,
okay.
Just worldview.org.
Okay. Now, today we're going to get back into the subject of euthanasia.
Is that the opposite of young people in Europe? Euthanasia?
The euthanasia would be quite different than young people out in Europe, for example. No. That's a pretty good pun, though. No, euthanasia. We're talking about good death in a moment, but not so good death.
Not
so good death in just a moment, but it's growing around the Western world especially. And I think every birth-imploding, abortion-saturated culture in the world today is moving in this direction. And, we've talked about the slippery slope argument all the way back into the late 70s, early 80s. Remember the ethical arguments concerning abortion. And I would use the slippery slope argument, which at points I think it is an effective argument because once you've surrendered the principle on life, nobody's safe. Nobody will be safe because what you're doing is you're opening up the floodgates to different forms of killing.
I often tell my students at Worldview Academy and at our Worldview Crux program that the students and I, have escaped the Holocaust of abortion. We have escaped the Holocaust of infanticide. But if the trend continues as it is, that I may escape the Holocaust of euthanasia, but they will not. Their grandchildren will put them down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's where we're headed. I don't think there's anything getting in the way of that at this point, unless there's something of a shift in the churches across this country. But the churches aren't radical enough. The churches don't preach the truth enough. The churches don't call people to repentance in the area of the use of abortion or abortifacients. There is not a principle of life that is really consistently applied in the Southern Baptist denomination, the Presbyterian Church of America. I would say the major denominations, the evangelical denominations in America are not taking a firm stand on the principle of life. And for that reason, I cannot believe that there won't be a holocaust of euthanasia soon to come. Now, France's parliament is voting on it right now. In fact, they have voted in favor of a bill to legalize assisted dying, paving the way for euthanasia and assisted dying under what campaigners would say would be some of the strictest conditions in Europe. After a sometimes emotional session, the deputies at the French Parliament, they passed the euthanasia bill by a vote of 305 to 199. They unanimously passed a less contentious law establishing a right to palliative care in specialist end-of-life institutions. But at the same time, Apparently, there was a trade-off happening, and France has now approved a euthanasia bill for the first time. As you know, Belgium and Netherlands have been on the front of this campaign for a number of years. I think for the Netherlands, they have allowed for euthanasia for at least 20 years, 20 plus years. In the UK as well, MPs have approved the legalization of assisted dying for adults with an incurable illness who have a life expectancy of under 6 months and are able to take the substance that causes their death themselves in a first vote in November of last year. Now they're voting again. Apparently, the bill's been amended to allow medics to opt out, and that's been sent up to the upper chamber for further scrutiny. And the Scottish Parliament as well has passed its first vote on a bill to legalize assisted dying. So Scotland, the UK, France, also Austria has legalized assisted dying as of 2022, and Spain adopted a law in 2021 allowing euthanasia and medically assisted dying. So now you're seeing that one nation after another of these post-Christian nations in Western Europe are allowing for euthanasia. And of course, again, this opens up the floodgates to doctors making these decisions, relatives making these decisions, and
we've seen in the Netherlands, for sure.
We've seen thousands already euthanized.
And in this nation, it was Oregon, I believe, that was the first state to legalize it.
And we're going to get to Oregon in just a moment. I want to get back to Oregon, but let's talk about euthanasia first. Euthanasia, what's it mean?
EU means good. It's Greek for good, and thanatos is the root for death. So it literally means a good death.
A good death. That doesn't make much sense. What's the worldview behind that, Bill?
It's the idea that suffering is bad, that one should avoid suffering at all costs, that we need to avoid the pain and the discomfort, and as a result, death is the relief for that. We see that in the issue of abortion. We need to relieve the suffering of the unwed mother. We need to relieve the burden on the economy of children that are unwanted. We've seen it with all of these different different social issues, and it leads to euthanasia. We are going to kill those who are young. We're going to kill those who are no longer needed, useless eaters, if you will, that are a burden on the economy, and those who are a burden on their families by families having to take care of those who are suffering. And so we need to get rid of suffering, and that's part of the background on euthanasia.
So let's impress this question to believers and unbelievers. Let's say the unbeliever has to grapple with the question of whether or not suffering is something that needs to be relieved by putting somebody out of their misery, so to speak. They have to grapple with a number of questions. One is it, no pain, no gain? Perhaps our lives are benefited by pain on the front end to receive some kind of reward on the other end. I mean, that could be something. One of the challenges here is, the average or any unbeliever, any person on earth cannot really determine the ultimate effects of any given action. So the utilitarian is always saying we do that which produces the most good for the most people in the long run. But the problem is we don't know what produces the most good in the long run. We don't have all of the possible interactions, cause and effect relationships to know what a single action could produce in terms of effects, and then judging all of the goodness of all of those effects and balancing that against the evil that one must suffer in one given situation. So again, we don't know the effects. We don't know what the end result would be. They believe that when they put somebody to death and put them out of their suffering, they believe that the end of this life is the best thing that can happen to the sufferer. But I think the best question to ask is, how do you know? Do you know what happens on the other side? What are the long-term effects of this or that action? And I don't think that anybody can answer that question. And outside of those who perhaps have read the Bible, it's and seen that God himself, who is beyond the realm of space and time, can give us some inputs on this. And thankfully, we do have divine revelation, but they don't accept divine revelation. Therefore, we press the question upon them. How do you know this will relieve their ultimate suffering and yield an ultimate good for them? And the answer is they don't have the answer. They don't know.
The underlying assumption is that life is all you have. And so,
but that's just an assumption.
It's an assumption. I'm reminded of the parent who has to take the infant in for for very painful chemotherapy for a cancer that's discovered in the child, and how the child in every trip is screaming and looking at the parent saying, why are you letting me go through this? Why are you letting them do this to me?
Well, the assumption is that's going to yield a good effect.
But the child does not know that.
Right.
The child has no clue that it's for his good and benefit ultimately. And so you're right. You can't know the consequences of pain and suffering. The only person who has an answer for that, it's either the Hindus' view, the Eastern mystics' view, which is that suffering is illusion.
Mm-hmm. In which they just deny it.
They deny it exists.
Not that really helps the person that's screaming bloody murder because they're in pain, but oh well.
Yeah. Or it's that we have to avoid suffering at all costs, the hedonistic view, or the Christian view, and that is that suffering has a purpose in the end that we may not know what it is, but that God does, and that God will wipe away every tear. He will relieve all the pain and suffering ultimately. The biggest question is, why is there evil in the world? Why is there pain and suffering? And only the Christian has the answer for that, because any other worldview cannot even say it's evil. They cannot say that suffering is wrong and it's evil. The Christian can say, yes, suffering is wrong, but there is good that may come from it, and I'll leave that up to the Creator.
And we just believe, Romans 8:28, that all things work together for good, including the suffering we must go through, will work together for good to those who love God. And also, Paul says in the same chapter, I think, the suffering of this present age is not worthy to be compared with the glory that awaits.
Right.
And so we have that revelation from God, that certainty, that assurance from God that this suffering of this age has a purpose to it. Obviously, our sanctification, we could add other things that tie into this, but we know that God has a purpose, a good purpose. A purpose that involves a good end, or a good purpose and a good objective or goal for the suffering that we go through in this life. Well, euthanasia is killing somebody. Let's just say it. It's to kill somebody. It's to commit a crime. It is to murder somebody. The Bible says, "Thou shalt not murder." What does that mean, Bill?
Well, it means that you are not to take one's life unnecessarily or without cause. Mm-hmm. There are the exceptions in war. Okay.
So there's exceptions made.
There are exceptions made. Right. There are exceptions if you were attacking my family, if you were breaking into my home. But if I'm laying in there in bed, and I'm suffering. I'm not dead. I'm just suffering, and I'm taking painkiller. I can't put the pillow over your head.
You can't put the pillow over my head and snuff me out.
No.
You can't do that.
Now we have to recognize that with modern technology, we can keep someone alive, well, nearly indefinitely on machines. Mm-hmm. There's a natural end to life. Mm-hmm. But we are not to actively take one's life. And that's part of what used to be called the Hippocratic Oath.
Well, I found a definition of it online. This is a dictionary definition of euthanasia. Here it is. The painless killing of a patient suffering from an incurable and painful disease. Now, immediately I looked at incurable disease, and I thought, I'm going to Google that. Okay, here is a list of incurable diseases. Okay, I got 300 that were listed. I'm guessing there are more than that, but this one website had 300. Now, you want to hear the incurable diseases involved. Okay, euthanasia is legitimized by certain governments in the world, the painless killing of a patient suffering from an incurable disease. Now, of the 300 listed on this one particular website, joint pain. Joint pain.
Is that pain caused by smoking marijuana? Joint pain?
No, it's elbow, knee thing kind of thing. Yeah.
Like joint.
Yeah,
oh, I see.
Joints, yeah. You ever had joint pain?
Yes.
My wife has it now. I don't want to euthanize her. Here's one more.
I would guess she doesn't want you to euthanize her.
I don't think she does. Now, here's one more. It was right there on the list. Lymphedema. And Bill, I'm here to tell you, I've had lymphedema since I was a baby, since birth. You going to kill me? You going to kill me, Bill?
Well, some people would like to put you down.
Bill, not for that. Fetal alcohol syndrome, asthma, Alzheimer's, Crohn's disease, hearing loss, cancer. The common cold was on the list.
Whoa.
The common cold. That's a lot of killing. You're going to be killing a lot of people with that.
Oofda.
So anyway, Bill, what do you say when you have a definition for euthanasia that is so broad that you could wind up killing almost anybody? And Bill, they're extending it now to mental diseases in places like England and the Netherlands. So are we on a slippery slope here?
Yes. But
it's not looking good.
This has been taught for decades. I debated Dr. Michael Tooley, who was a philosophy prof at the University of Colorado. He was a PhD prof.
Yeah.
He dealt with those seeking PhDs in philosophy. And he wrote in a book, in a defense of abortion and infanticide, he said, since I do not believe human infants are persons, but only potential persons, and since I think that the destruction of potential persons is a morally neutral action, the correct conclusion seems to me to be that infanticide is in itself morally acceptable. He goes on to talk about euthanasia and how he
Who is this guy? Who is this guy one time?
This was Michael Tooley. He was a professor of philosophy at the University of Colorado.
Oh, man. So this guy teaches the next generation of American lawyers, political scientists, et cetera. Yeah,
yep.
Okay.
And
so he's okay with infanticide.
Yep.
As well as euthanasia.
Yep. He says this, in conclusion, and this is in a book in 1980. Mm-hmm. In conclusion, then, it is far from clear that the commonly accepted distinction between active and passive euthanasia is morally significant. I have tried to argue in some detail that the distinction between killing and letting die is not morally significant in itself.
Okay. Well,
now, ideas have consequences.
Yes, they do.
Good ideas, excellent consequences. Mm-hmm. Bad ideas, victims.
Okay, I said I was going to mention Oregon. So Oregon is really on the frontier of this. The state of Oregon's demographics, okay, I'm going to tie in a couple things here, and I want you to follow this. The state of Oregon's demographics not doing well. The state now has more elderly over 65 years of age than children under 18. Okay? Back in 1985, what is that, 35 years ago. In 1985, there were twice as many children as elderly. Now, it's equal. At this rate, in 10 more years, Oregon will have 40% more seniors than children. And by the way, Oregon holds the position as the 8th worst position in demographics in the nation today, others being on the Eastern Seaboard, all the rest of them Eastern Seaboard. But Oregon is the first state, and here's the key, Oregon was the first state to legalize physician-assisted suicide back in 1994. So all those who hate me love death. And so what we're seeing in Oregon is an embracing of the abortion, the abortifacient, the birth-imploding approach to having children. So you have far fewer children born in Oregon than other places around America today. And Oregon is as well increasing its elderly to the point that there won't be enough children or young people to work to provide for the medical care and for the sustenance of the elderly folk in the state of Oregon in the years to come. So it's as if the timing was, quote unquote, right for this, in that they're aborting all their kids, they're getting ready to slaughter as many elderly as possible. Again, Oregon, the first state to legalize physician-assisted suicide in 1994, which would have been almost, 30 years ago. Yeah. Incredible.
And Colorado is not far behind. Colorado has legalized euthanasia as well, as have many other states. So we are fast approaching a nation that loves death in all forms.
2011 was an important year in the history of the Western world. So don't ever forget the year 2011. 2011 was the year that outlays for the Social Security fund exceeded income for the very first time in American history. And it was also the first year that 80 million baby boomers were starting to retire. It was the first year at which the first baby boomers hit 65 years of age. So 2011 was a very important year in the history of the United States of America. The year at which the Social Security Fund went into the red for the first time, and the year that 80 million baby boomers began to retire and would continue to retire over the next 25 years or 30 to 40 years. Now, it turns out that 80 million baby boomers had killed 80 million babies. Really bad idea because they imploded the birth rate and the worker to retiree ratio, which was 40 to 1 in 1940, 5.1 in 1960, now 2.5 to 1 in the year 2025, soon to be 2 to 1 in 2035. So what you're looking at is a worker to retiree ratio that will be incapable of providing for the elderly, the retirees, at least for their medical care and for their sustenance in the years to come.
So we need to get rid of them.
So again, let's follow this through. 80 million baby boomers started retiring the year that the Social Security Fund, which was the Ponzi scheme developed in the 1930s, went into the red for the very first time. And yet they were also the 80 million baby boomers that killed about 80 million babies through the use of surgical abortions, the pills, and all the rest since the 1973 or since the early 1960s. So, but then you say, well, okay, but yeah, there's far fewer workers, but at least the character of the new generation is going to be unbelievable, and they will be so charitable and so hardworking. They will provide whatever is needed for the retirees in the year 2045. To which you will say, Bill,
they're going to put their grandparents down.
To which you say, what are you smoking? Of course, yeah.
We're going back to the joint pain, aren't we?
Oh, the most inevitable consequence of this, the absolute appropriate segue we're going to find happening in the development of the Western world will be an increase in euthanasia to the tune of, I can't imagine, but there being 10, 20, 30 million elderly being slaughtered across the country in the year 2045. To make matters worse, of course, the federal government is not doing very well. You say, well, the federal government might be able to salvage the Social Security Fund in the year 2035, which is the year in which they're going to go bankrupt, and there'll be at least a 25% drop in the average Social Security check in the year 2035. You say, yeah, but the federal government's doing great. They don't have any debt. All except for the fact the debt to GDP ratio is 3 times what it was back in 1975. So with that small exception, the federal government is not going to be able to pay. They're not going to be able to get into any further debt. And of course, you've got a fair number of young people who are going to vote to eliminate the Social Security Fund by the year 2045. So you've got that issue as well. To make matters worse, now listen to this, more than 4/5 of spending growth over the next 15 years will come from Social Security, health, and interest on the debt. From fiscal year 2025 to 2035, this according to the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, between 2025 and 2035, nominal spending will grow by 53%, according to the latest CBO baseline. About 83% of the increase is just to keep Social Security, health care, and the net interest on the national debt going. So, in other words, you're looking at a federal debt that's adding $2 trillion to the debt on an annual basis, soon to be $3 trillion, soon to be $4 trillion. And at that point, I don't think there's going to be much left to the world economy to keep America alive. And granted, America's been, moving ahead because we've got a fair amount of momentum, but understand that we have used up all of the character capital of previous generations. We've slaughtered 80 million babies, and we've spent our great-great-great-grandchildren into debt. What's the future look like, friends? This worldview of me-centered, existentialistic, it's all about me, all about my materialism. It's all about worshiping self and forget about the future generation, killing the future generation, and moving the rest of the future generation into multiple levels of debt is not going to do very well for human society on planet Earth. I think that's pretty obvious at this point in time. So now if you look at the year 2035, the combined retirement disability trust fund for the Social Security Fund will be depleted according to the intermediate projections. The average recipient now receives $2,000. That will be cut to $1,500, probably lower. The average apartment rental in the U.S. is now $1,600, and that's a one-bedroom apartment. They're not going to be able to afford a single-bedroom apartment. The typical Gen X household has just $40,000 in retirement savings. The median savings for the baby boomers was about $200,000. $158,000. Average debt for Gen X households, $158,000 compared to $94,000 for the baby boom generation. 50% of Gen Xers have a few $1,000s saved for retirement, and that's going to last about half a month. Retirement savings for Gen X is highly concentrated among top earners. The bottom half of Gen X households right now have almost nothing saved for retirement. That is the bottom half of Gen Xers retiring in the year 2035. They have almost nothing saved. The bottom quartile has got $200 saved for retirement. That'll last for about 2 or 3 days. The second quartile has $4,290 saved for retirement. That'll last for maybe 2 months. And they've got, $1,500 in Social Security, and that's best case scenario, assuming the federal government does really well in reining in costs over the next 10 years. So, Bill, what's that tell you? It tells you the worldview that's been foisted upon the last 4 to 5 generations in slaughtering 80 million babies and sending our great-great-great-grandkids into debt and completely depleting the Social Security fund is probably going to leave the next generation with nothing on their hands but death. And I honestly, I can't think of any other possibility than the euthanizing of 20, 30, 40 million elderly by the year 2045, except if the church steps in and preaches the truth and calls people to repentance on these issues.
And that's the hope we have. The hope we have is that the church will wake up, that Christians will begin to be serious about their faith, and that they will proclaim truth and grace and the hope of Jesus Christ. But right now, looking at it from a human perspective, it's very bleak.
Well,
and yet, that's when
that's when the church can step in,
and that's when that little phrase "but God."
Yeah, I know.
God.
I know.
That's when it comes in.
I think we're heading for the greatest opportunity that we have seen in 200 years. Since the Great Awakening, for Christianity and for the Christian church to step in and be what the Christian church needs to be. Not the Marxist approach to charity, but the biblical approach to charity where it's voluntary, it's local, and we're reaching for our own wallets and we're providing for the needs of our communities. That's going to be the only solution to getting out of this terrible morass that we've gotten into because of the humanists, the socialists, and the Marxists. And here, let me just say this. I just want to make one simple application. I know I've made this point before, but churches need to be ready to pay for the knee replacement for that widow in the church. We'll take up a collection, pay for the knee replacement instead of waiting for the bankrupt Medicaid to take care of it for her. And you know what? Already in places like Canada, we were just up in Canada and someone said, I've been waiting for 6 months for a surgery and I think I finally got in. 2 months from now, I'm finally getting into this. Socialist medicine's a joke. It's not working. It won't work. And we're going to run out of other people's money. I mean, that's a given. We all know that. So here's what I'm saying. By the year 2035, every God-fearing, Jesus-loving church in America needs to be ready to take up a collection for that knee replacement for that widow in the church because the bankrupt Medicaid is not going to do it, and our system here is going to be bankrupt. And by the way, a knee replacement in Mexico costs $11,000. Average knee replacement here is $35,000. There's going to be perhaps an opportunity for a little bit of medical tourism in the process. But the bottom line here, Bill, is we're going to absolutely need private charity, the church charity, to step in for this. I just finished an entry to my Proverbs Bible study guide that I'm publishing in the next couple of weeks. And this is one point I ended on one particular proverb that I was working through on the study guide. Here's what I wrote. What is more needed today than love for neighbors? The present age is the prime representation of a world where the love of many has grown cold. Matthew 24:12. The world has killed about 3 billion children by abortion and at least another 5 billion by the use of abortifacient since 1960, which I footnote. The detrimental effects of such mass-produced, cold-blooded killings has produced in the hearts of mothers and fathers worldwide something beyond anybody's comprehension. The world has realized the perilous times described in 2 Timothy 3:1, in which men are known for their complete lack of natural affection, 2 Timothy 3:3. Having invested a full half-century into draining the nations of any remnants of natural affection and deifying the self-God, the world has turned itself into an intolerably miserable place. Nevertheless, we may be encouraged that the true church is more than ever a haven of God's love. The world may be very much assured that we are his disciples because we love one another. This is the best place on earth where the people love God and they love one another with the love wherewith they have been loved by God. And that, my friends, is the only solution to what we face in the future, the dark, dark future of a brave new world that has abandoned God and his truth, and where the love of many has grown cold. And that wraps up this edition of the Generations broadcast. This is Kevin Swanson and Bill Jack, inviting you back again next time as we continue to lay down a vision for the next generation.